profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered, even in 100 of us, having it accepted and maintained. May I taste the truth of the Tathagata words. Good morning. Today, I want to continue a theme that has been coming up in the Sunday talks and bring up some of the ways our practice relates to the protests against racial injustice and how we meet and transform the collective suffering of racism, a core wound of this culture. And one of the images that has been coming up for me here is coming down to this earth. So one place this appeared was in a piece in Lion's Roar called Darkness is Asking to be Loved by Zenju Earthlyn Manuel. She wrote, "Come down here on this earth and breathe for those gasping for air." So what is this coming down to earth, coming down to this earth? So one sense is opening to suffering, opening to our own pain, our own difficulty, opening to the pain and distress of others. And this is one half of Tonglen practice, which we've been talking about. Tonglen is an embodied compassion practice of sending and taking, or receiving and giving. And these ride the breath. So it's a practice of breathing and suffering. This is taking. This is receiving. Breathing out awakening. Breathing out liberation. This is sending or giving. And this, kind of turns over our natural inclination to move away from pain and to keep the stuff that's good. And it's engaging our breathing as a embodied medium of relationality in meeting the challenges of our life, our personal life, interpersonal life, our collective communal life. And we generally start by breathing in our own suffering. And this is our foundation for opening a real connection with the suffering of others over and over. And we start with exactly what's happening here. And so this is a practice of welcoming, receiving, allowing, fully feeling what is. A process of opening and releasing grasping. And breathing in, what's here, sensations, feelings, emotions, discomfort, reactivity, defenses. And we give this some time. So we may breathe in like this for a whole bunch of breaths. We give some time for our breathing and our welcoming and our allowing to become deep and intimate. So this is one way we come down to this earth, and in our practice, we sit down on the earth, whether it's on a cushion or a chair, on the ground or on a street. We root down, we feel down, and we completely allow ourselves to be a part of this world, a part of this earth. And I think especially in looking at our racial suffering we want to ground in this intimacy with our own pain, our own reactivity, because racial suffering for many of us is deep and complex, intense, unclear, unresolved. We may be defended in diverse ways, and our defenses seem like they protect us from stuff that can hurt us. But our defenses sometimes also function to lock us up in here, to make our lives feel small. We confine ourselves, and our life can become static or feel static. So we're breathing in our defenses, feeling through them, feeling through our reactivity, our fear, our insulation. And we're creating a kind space. We're caring for a kind, loving, vulnerable space, which opens transformation and liberation. And so the way down to the earth is through our defenses, through our fear, and through our discomfort. It is through our cynicism, our fixed ideas, avoidance, aversion. Some of us might be feeling saturated. If we're feeling this, breathe this in also. We feel it and investigate it, check it out. We welcome it into a big, kind space. And then we can gently question it. Some of us might be feeling overwhelmed. We can feel overwhelmed if too much is happening. We might be feeling overwhelmed if there's just one highly stressful or traumatic thing happening. We can feel overwhelmed by racial suffering because it's vast and complex. We might feel overwhelmed in facing our racial conditioning because it's so deep and obscure. Or we can feel overwhelmed by a combination of these. And our fear and our overwhelm can be destabilizing. They can make us want to disconnect, float off the earth a little. Various efforts to escape, to tune out, to deflect, to avoid or resist or deny. So what is our way and with and through overwhelm? So the way down to the earth is loving and gentle, feeling and allowing. So what comes up with bringing up race? So we bring this up in a kind space. Last week, Joan pointed out how we sometimes call race an issue. And calling it an issue, I thought, well, maybe that's a way to keep it at arm's length, abstract it from our lives. Race is something out there. But race is not out there. Race is something that we do. And it's something we do with our minds. Race is a mental and social construct. Skin color can often be part of the construct, but race as a construct is not just about the color or brightness or darkness of our skin. Nationality is sometimes part of the construct, but not always. As constructs go, Race does not actually make a lot of sense if we examine it carefully. And actually, it has no genetic or scientific basis. In part, whiteness as a construct is based on a reductive, deranged, and harmful idea of purity. And we can see this in how whiteness has been defined. One approach, a person with any ancestor who is Black would not be white. That's called the one-drop rule. Some states in the United States had that as a definition. Some states had a 1/8 rule. Some states had a 1/16 rule. So if one of your great-grandparents or if one of your great-great-grandparents was not white, you were defined as not white. So we can see it's just an idea. It's a construct. But as a construct, what people have done with it and continue to do is very real. So it's a construct that has deeply shaped our lives and continues to shape our lives. And working with constructs that cause suffering is kind of a specialty of Zen. So how do we work with constructs? And I'd say one of the key principles of working with constructs is we come down to this earth, this ground, this body, to a sense of connection. And this is our ground for studying this construct. So being in touch with our suffering is the ground for inquiring into this construct and feeling how it works in us. So what comes up when we bring up race? How do we hold it? How do we process our racial identity and our racial conditioning and the suffering and harm that come with it? Can we notice what comes up for us and face it and meet it? And meet this, it's often uncomfortable. And not grasp it, not get attached to it, and not lean into reactivity or defenses. To breathe it in and carefully into our life, into our awareness, and welcome it and give it some space, some kind space. There might be aversion or overwhelm or guilt or shame, deep pain or numbness. And we breathe it in. Breathing in suffering, coming down to earth, we're starting to actualize Bodhisattva heart. It's a boundless heart. It's a heart that there actually aren't limits on what this heart can feel. It can allow for complexity, for many feelings, many emotions all at once in this moment. In this, the bigger, the kinder the space, the more it can allow. So I don't look at race as an issue out there. It's part of my life, part of our life. And so I don't feel like practice is one thing and race is another. Practice is coming down to the earth of this life. And we're bringing this up now in part because of the opportunity of this time. I feel a call to keep building and deepening the momentum of this time and its potential for positive change. And racial justice is a living struggle. This is a real struggle about how we honor humanity in this society. And it's hard to talk about. I think my earliest memory is going to my friend Mark's birthday party when I was in kindergarten. Mark was Black, and when we got to the party, I was the only white kid there. And this was, 47 years ago or so. And so I don't really remember very clearly, but my vague memory is that my dad and Mark's mom tacitly agreed that this was going to be a really short visit. This was going to be drop off the present, say happy birthday, and go home. And this is not what I'd been thinking. But a few minutes later, we were in the car driving home, and this memory has stayed with me. That's my only memory from before first grade. And I think one thing I learned was that race could be a kind of problem. And another thing I learned was it's not something that gets talked about. Nothing was said. So race is hard to talk about, to face and to engage. And but this is, we have Sangha. We have the support of working with each other, working on our racial suffering in ways that are mutually supportive. So another way of coming down to earth is to locate ourselves. So part of this is to acknowledge, for me to acknowledge, I am white, I am a man, and both of these come with privilege, with power. And to acknowledge this can be a little step towards giving up this privilege or utilizing privilege to dismantle it. And when I acknowledge I am white, I'm acknowledging my place in a fabric of racial suffering. And I can breathe that in. Racial conditioning impacts all of us, but not in the same ways, such that the structures and systems of this society work against Black people, and in various ways against all people of color, and favor white people, favor me. And white people created, control, and maintain the system, and in large part live in denial of it, and also live in denial of responsibility. And even though we're impacted in very different ways across race, we're all woven together into one fabric of racial conditioning. Our suffering within and across race is all woven together. White privilege is woven together in one fabric with police killings of Black people. Privilege and oppression are woven together. And how we are woven into this is not something we chose, not something we could control. We didn't make this. We didn't make this fabric, but we're made of it. It is part of how we come to be. And we can inquire, we can investigate how our identity, how our self, how our views, how our thinking, our perceptions, our experience are shaped and formed in, through, and of this fabric. And we can also look at how the fundamental delusion of separation is woven into this fabric. We can inquire into and feel how the fabric of racial conditioning is a painful collective embodiment of belief in separation. and of greed, hate, and delusion. Angel Kyodo Williams says, you cannot possibly understand the nature of your mind without understanding the nature of the collective mind. And in this culture, the nature of the collective mind is oppression, white supremacy, and patriarchy. This is what we are all born into. So as we are part of this fabric or collective mind, we can be part of maintaining it or transforming it. So can we see how we're part of it? Can we see how we may be participating in maintaining it? Can we see how we have been formed by it? Some of us might not feel how we're woven into this. Some of us might not fully feel or fully see how we're woven into this. And as long as we don't see it, as long as we don't feel it, we probably won't change it or address it. And this is a complex fabric. It's not just black and white. All the forms of racism and domination that have unfolded in this country, in this culture, in this society are woven in. So class, gender, sexuality, nationality, ability, these all interweave with or in or as this fabric. So woven into this fabric with multiple intertwining systems of power and domination. And basically in all cases, we're working with reductive categories of humanity that are a deep part of the history of this country, deeply woven into our minds in ways that are complex and intersecting, and that unfold into profound suffering. And that suffering is real right now. And so we can't get out of this fabric. It's in us. But how it's in us is how we have agency. So as we come to own how we're part of this fabric, we can participate in transforming it. Those who have been oppressed in various ways, who have been harmed or held down or held back or diminished or confined, have long worked as part of the fabric, to liberate the whole fabric, while those who have benefited often have not. When whiteness is normalized, the so-called race issue feels optional to whites. Race is an issue that people of color have. So whiteness tends to disown its own racial location and disown its own responsibility. But the moral weight of the dehumanization of racism belongs to white people. And we will all live with this suffering until white people, in particular, or especially, commit to transforming it. An author named Scott Woods writes, racism is an insidious cultural disease. It's insidious that it doesn't care if you are a white person who likes black people. It's still going to find a way to infect how you deal with people who don't look like you. Yes, racism looks like hate, but hate is just one manifestation. Privilege is another. Access is another. Ignorance is another. Apathy is another. He also says it's a set of socioeconomic traps and culture values that are fired up every time we interact with the world. It is a thing you have to keep scooping out of the boat of your life to keep from drowning in it. I know it's hard work, but it's the price you pay for owning everything. So white people have this responsibility because white people hold the power and have held it tightly. So, part of hearing this talk about racial suffering, I think for those of us who are white, is there can be a kind of message. We can hear a kind of message that in some level or in some ways, you are not okay, or what you are doing is not enough. And so hearing this, receiving this, breathing this in, can also be a way of coming down to earth. But, again, in a kind space. So how do we hear this? How do we hear this without shutting down or sinking into shame? How do we hear this without disputing it or deflecting it to something we're more comfortable with? And how do we hear this as an invitation actually to connect rather than a judgment? How do we receive this call to inhabit, engage our location in racial suffering, take responsibility for our part, and work for liberation? So this is a cry of the world. We've had a few protests, Stone Creek protests in solidarity with Black Lives Matter on Friday evenings, and one of the signs said, when George Floyd called for his mama, he summoned all mamas. And he summoned all of us. For some, or perhaps many of us who are white, to bring up racial suffering is to bring up an inadequacy to meet and transform this suffering. So this is part of the reason why I want to start with opening a big, kind space. Because the real way we are okay is not by denying or shoving down the voices that say we're not okay. It's when we give up grasping and just let everything come into an all-inclusive heart. There's a sense in which bodhisattvas are kind of endless inadequacy without being discouraged. A limitless inadequacy is kind of a natural corollary to a heart of deep, endless compassion, living through a limited, conditioned psychophysical being in a world of tremendous suffering. So there's this call. Is it a painful reminder or is it a gift? It's a voice invoking awakening, a vision invoking freedom, and calling us to actualize awakening and freedom, calling us to take our place in the family of humanity and embrace the challenges of responding wholeheartedly calling us into deep, caring connection, calling us down to earth to address this deep, unresolved wound together. And our own defenses, and our fear, and our shame, and our guilt are part of how this wound continues to be unresolved. So part of breathing and suffering is a practice of being okay with being not okay. Part of practice is living in a contradiction of being okay and not being okay. There's a way in which, well, if we're just okay, have we lifted off the earth? Are we kind of floating above, out of touch with suffering, insulated from the problems of the world? How do we have a living function? Is this freedom or is this just escape? And if we're just not okay, are we just totally caught up in a swirl of suffering, grasping, and harm? So we're looking for a dynamic middle way between like this transcendent bypassing and being trapped in perpetuating cycles of hurt and harm. And there is a way in which we are basically inadequate, always unfinished, and yet always fully and adequately human. Always imperfect in a way that's alive, ever-changing, full of possibility and potential. And it can be messy and hard, but this is where we actually find the fullness of our life and the meaning of being in this moment. We need to be okay with being not okay. And we need to be not okay with being okay. We need both. This is part of liberating bodhisattva practice. And in Zazen, we have samadhi. We can grow a groundedness, a stability, which supports us to engage this contradiction wholeheartedly. So I want to widen and deepen my sense of responsibility. The collective karma of systemic racism is our karma. And because of that, we are the pivot. So this is part of coming down to earth, inhabiting our location, our place in racial suffering. Breathing this in, seeing how we're always in a context, seeing how we're always in a racialized context, and seeing how we're always impacting each other within such contexts. When I was about 15, I went to buy an album at a record store. It was on 57th Street in my neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. And the cashier, a Black teenager, gave me my change. And I thought I'd given him a 20, but I only got change for a 10. And so I asked him, I thought it felt such an innocent question. I asked him, didn't I give you a 20? And his face changed to intense exasperation. So I thought it was innocent, but coming out of a white person to a Black person, it wasn't. And I was not trying to be aggressive, but it manifested a societal mistrust of him as Black. And so his expression of exasperation has stayed with me and calling me down to this earth, calling me to see myself as white, appreciate the context of this, and how my feeling of innocence is not harmless. Because the context of systemic racism means I am an agent of harm. And again, the context is not my fault, but I'm responsible for how I show up in it. I'm responsible for how I've been conditioned to see some people as other. And this can be part of a transformative reckoning. It's part of breathing in. And then we also have a breathing out into action, into activity. Another piece of this coming down to earth for me is humility. Opening to racial suffering, breathing in my impact as a white person, I am humbled. And I also feel this connection between humility, coming down to earth, and our practice, our ritual practice of full prostrations, of touching our forehead to the earth. And this being humbled is different than being humiliated. So being humiliated is an injury to our dignity and self-respect, while humility can be a function of our dignity and self-respect. Being humbled is how our real dignity is grounded on the earth, grounded in opening to larger possibilities of our heart, and carried forth with through courage and conviction. So our real dignity is not hierarchical. There is no higher or lower or mattering more or less. Our real self-worth is not quantifiable. It is a total equality or a bottomless equality. It's an equality of how we are each a unique and ungraspable infinity of relatedness. And we only find the fullness of our life and the true depths of our hearts down here on the earth. And it is not my heart's deepest request to live from defensive postures or fear, but to trust the humility of being on the earth and the truths that unfold in conversation on that ground of vulnerability and living from the heart. Because of, intertwined with privilege, maybe we who are white can be paralyzed by overwhelm, uncertainty, shame, or apathy. And to find some willingness to take this up and face it and stand for Black Lives Matter, to do something rather than nothing, is to give up some privilege. And that's a little step towards giving up some oppression. And so I feel like there is, I've used words like pain and suffering a lot, but there's also great potential here for all of us to find a form of life together, to actualize liberation together. to actualize an inclusive healing and um, mutual form of belonging. We want to be awake in comfortable and uncomfortable stuff. If we're only awake when it's comfortable and go to sleep when it's uncomfortable, that's not freedom. And that will severely limit our growth and learning. So entering a space of change is uncomfortable. And we may need to stretch, in many ways. And so we're finding our agency through breathing in injustice and breathing out a deeper vision of justice. Breathing out collective moral courage. Breathing out the collective stamina and determination and love we will need to transform this fabric of suffering. And we can inquire, what is my role in maintaining systems of dominance? How do I engage bodhisattva practice? How do I become an agent of change? How am I impacted by racial conditioning? At some level, in my experience, in my belief, in my views, is there a sense of a real or essential difference in humanity based on the construct of race? So our practice calls us to engage and liberate this whole fabric of racial conditioning, becoming intimate with how it works and transforming it, actualizing wisdom and compassion. And we're doing this, we're making this effort out of a sense of connection, of love, of caring, of not wanting to harm. A deep appreciation of our shared humanity and how everything we do has an impact. Our practice of awakening is always leading us into a deeper embrace with the suffering of this world. An embrace of a fierce devotion to this world. A love grounded in conviction that we're all equally and totally children of this world. And that challenges any claim that some matter more or less. And it's often not clear what to do, but we have this practice. We can check this out right here. And without it being clear, fully clear, we need to act. And keep inquiring and asking what to do and not give up. And this is our vow, to breathe in like this and breathe out like this. And to inquire into how this breathing and suffering and breathing out awakening, how this is meditation and how this is our life in the world. This is our function in the world. And how do we make that real? How do we make that live? So coming down to the earth in these ways is something we never finish, and it is something we can always do. And I want to close with a forgiveness phrase. To those whom I may have caused harm, knowingly or unknowingly, through my thoughts, words, and actions, I ask your forgiveness. So thank you very much. So we can have questions and comments now, expressions.
Korin, can you hear me?
Yes.
This past week, a civic leader here in Sonoma County had to step down from his post because he had issued some kind of a formal statement saying that all lives mattered. Now, this phrase is perceived by some as denigrating the idea of Black lives matter. To me, the former is more of a kind of a view that we as Buddhists would take. I wondered what your take is on this.
Well, I feel like all lives matter is a principle, and it's an important principle. And I feel like Black Lives Matter is saying, down here on the earth, right now, we are not living all lives matter. And we, and so we it's fine to have that principle, but what are we doing? So Black Lives Matter is not saying that anybody matters more than anyone else. It's saying Black lives don't matter down here on the streets where, this police officer has his knee on George Floyd's neck. And so it's a call to actualize all lives matter. I think one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, I think she said, all lives won't matter till Black lives matter. So when people say all lives matter, to me, I hear a deflection. I don't really want to look at this. I don't want to look at the inequality in our society right now. I want to just put out this truth and kind of let Black Lives Matter go to the side where it's been for the entire history of this country. So for me, this is how I hear Black Lives Matter, is it's a call to change. It's not a debate about people's lives mattering more or less. It's about, how people are suffering in this culture right now.
My feeling is that you can hold both.
Well, I think Black Lives Matter totally holds all lives matter. But I think if we keep deflecting from Black Lives Matter, we won't address it. So I guess I feel like, anyway, I could see how people hear Black Lives Matter in this way that's espousing some principle of that doesn't seem to be affirming all lives. But it's my understanding of the expression, and why I support it is because it's actually about addressing suffering that's real in our culture.
Thank you for your answer. It was just disturbing to me that whoever that leader was here in Sonoma County was badgered to step down from his position.
Well, that I think is another question. There is that question, which is like, what happens when people make mistakes? Or what happens when people express limited views that are problematic? Do they need to exit their position immediately? That I don't necessarily agree with. I believe we need transformative conversations. And so if this leader was willing to engage with humility in a transformative conversation, I don't know if they would need, my feeling is it's not necessarily going to help to just keep pulling people out and having someone else come in who's just going to make the same mistakes. How are we going to transform the situation?
Korin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your talk. This whole topic has been really difficult and important and kind of strange for me, because I feel like on the one hand, I'm not part of the conversation, being neither Black nor brown nor white. But one thing that has come across for me is that a lot of the time in these conversations with white people, I get a lot of expressions of like sympathy and sorrow, and which seems funny to me because I would say that among people of color that I know, most of us feel sorry for white people because they seem like so clueless about how they come across. And so, for example, if I walk into a room full of white people, I know exactly what they see because I've seen it in the movies, I've seen it in the media. They see an Asian woman, they have all kinds of fantasies, I would say white fantasies about what that means, but they have no idea what I see. And, you know, and so I guess that level of, that lack of awareness or that lack of self-awareness is something that I would think as Buddhists, people would especially want to address.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the talk so much. One thing that I've had to kind of unpack for myself is my own internalized experience of being Jewish, and I have not felt white. I mean, I grew up feeling other and feeling disconnected to the culture I was in. And so in a way, it was a gift because out of it, I felt a empathy and a connection to others. And at the same time, I realize it's been an obstacle to me seeing my white privilege because the way I'm moving in the culture is with that privilege. I feel that more as I've grown older. When I was a young adult, I mean, when I was trying to get an apartment, they wouldn't rent to Jews and Puerto Ricans and Negroes, you know. I mean, I had those kinds of experiences as a young adult, but my older, you know, well, anyway, my point is that in looking at race and going inside, seeing my own ways I've internalized things and how it's blocked my understanding of privilege, and now I'm looking at that much more deeply and trying to see all the ways that race has impacted me personally in my development, psychological development, and then also trying to see how I can get out of my own story and help and be woven into a new transformative history story.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it's a complex situation, and we can sometimes we're on one, we can shift, and some of the lines shift in a lifetime, and you know, what the construct is used in various ways, you know, and how it's been used is evolved, and this is part of how it's a construct, and I think it can be important to notice our own experiences of when, for whatever reason, it feels like we don't matter. Like, so when we feel disrespected by someone else's actions, how does that impact us? How does that feel? We might have just been we might feel disrespected just not because of our race, but just because of something, maybe because the other person just wasn't paying attention or caring about us, but still we might feel disrespected. How is that? And connect with that feeling, and then have a sense of like, well, what if the whole culture is saying that to you everywhere you go?
Mhm.
That's your experience of every institution and every public service in the country, is like, you don't, you don't matter as much. And so yeah, I think we find, or we find these ways to build a sense of connection and compassion.
Thank you. I want to add one more comment, which is, sometimes I think the Black Lives Matter can feel remote to us in Sonoma County. And I feel that everyone has in their daily experience connection with people of color, and have those relationships to look at. And that we could kind of miss the undocumented or immigrant community and how we're relating day to day in our communities, and kind of disassociate that from the issue of race or black, or this kind of looking at it. I don't know. Do you get what I mean? Like, it's right here. It's not far away. It's in our daily interactions that we can look at, examine our interaction, our biases.
And I think that, the deeper, if we really engage this struggle and we can make forward progress on it, it's not separate. The issue of Black lives and, and people, all people of color in this culture are not actually separate. And likewise, the issue of race and class, not separate. So I feel like, we I don't think we should start to think of them as being isolated, but appreciate that they actually are tied together, and that the point of the whole thing is honoring, actually actualizing our shared humanity as a society.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was really moving for me. I would love to hear more about not being okay with being okay, as a person of privilege, and the flip side, the being okay with not being okay. And you had mentioned that there can be a stability that can help embrace that contradiction. If you could share more about that, that would be wonderful.
I think the stability is this like this big kind space we can grow in sitting. And I mean, or I think that we have this form of practice of being upright and still. This doesn't work for everybody, but I think this is our big offering, is like, what if you give up all the moving and be upright, be aware, and then grow this space, cultivate a space of kindness that that doesn't have to push away, the calls, the cries of the world, and lets them touch ourselves in a way that it can evoke a lot of discomfort to face this, and but if we have this space, we can start to look at this. If we can and look at it deeply and feel it, and if kind of a feeling of like, this is an allowing space. Anything can come here and do what it wants. Let everything just come forth into sitting. When we're sitting, we're not going to hurt anybody. So just let everything come in and see how it works, And this is part of what I think, we're cultivating through our sitting practice, is this kind of a big space like this. Does that speak to you?
I imagine it will be an ongoing investigation. Thank you.
It's always ongoing. Yeah. This is endless. But it's part of, anyway, part of its endlessness is why this moment is meaningful. So maybe one more if there is something.
Okay. Could I say something, Korin? It's Donna.
Yes.
I just wanted to comment on two things that hit me. Now I got to find them on. I actually wrote them down. Well, you said being humbled and not humiliated, and that's really helpful for me because I find myself very unkind to myself very often and get humiliated. And so it's helpful for me to remember that. And then in response to what Thomas was addressing with you, I loved your statement about endless inadequacy. And I think you said without discouragement, is that the word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like, we're never going to be perfect. We have to be humbled by that, not humiliated. And we cannot be discouraged. We need to keep going and utilizing our tools, which is our Zazen, and keep moving forward. And it's difficult, but rewarding, really. So at times.
Yeah.
Thank you. I loved your talk.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your comment. Okay, let's do the closing chant. Four great bodhisattva vows. These are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless. I vow to realize it.